Hi, boys and girls. We're on chapter 6 of book 8. The Baudelaires are trying to figure out how they can get into the files in the Library of Records to find out more about the Snicket fires. I'm sorry, not Snicket, Baudelaire fires. This is not a tale of Lemony Snicket. It is useless to tell the Snicket story because it happened so very long ago and because there's nothing anybody can do about the way it has turned out. So the only reason I could possibly have for jotting it down in the margins of these pages would be to make this book even more unpleasant, unnerving, and unbelievable than it already is. This is a story about Violet Klaus and Sonny Baudelaire and how they discovered something in the Library of Records of Heimlich Hospital that changed their lives forever and still gives me the heebie-jeebies whenever I am alone at night. Stop. But if this were a book about me instead of about 3 children who would soon run into someone they hoped had never to see again, I might pause for a moment and tell you about something I did many years ago that still troubles me. It was a necessary thing to do, but it was not a nice thing, and even now I get a small quiver of shame in my stomach whenever I remember it. I might be doing something I enjoy, walking along the promenade deck of a ship, or looking through a telescope at the aurora borealis, or wandering into a bookstore and placing my books on the highest bookshelf placed in the shelf so that no one will be tempted to buy and read them, when I will suddenly remember what this thing I did, and think to myself, was it necessary? Was it absolutely necessary to steal that sugar bowl from Esme Squalor? The Baudelaire orphans were experiencing similar quivers that afternoon, as they finished up the day's work in the Library of Records. Every time Violet put a file in its proper place, she would feel her hair ribbon in her pocket, and get a quiver in her stomach as she thought about what she and her siblings were up to. Klaus would take a stack of papers from the basket in front of the deposit chute, and instead of placing the paper clips in the small bowl, he would keep them hidden in his hand, feeling a quiver in his stomach as he thought about the trick he and his sisters were going to play. And whenever Hal turned his back and Klaus passed the paper clips to Sonny, the youngest Baudelaire felt a quiver in her stomach as she thought about the sneaky way they were going to return to the Library of Records that night. By the time Hal was locking up the filing cabinets for the day with his long loop of keys, the 3 Baudelaire children had enough quivers in their stomach to attend a quivery stomach festival, if there had been one in this area this afternoon. Is it absolutely necessary to do this? Violet murmured to Klaus, as the 3 children followed Hal out of the library into the anteroom. She took her hair ribbon out of her pocket and smoothed it out, making sure it didn't have any tangles. It's not a nice thing to do. I know, Klaus answered, holding his hand out, so Sonny could hand back the paper clips. I have a quiver in my stomach just thinking about it, but it's the only way we can get our hands on that file. Olaf, Sonny said grimly. She meant before Matthias gets his hands on us. And as soon as she was finished with her sentence, Matthias's scratchy voice came over the intercom. Attention, attention, the voice said, as Hal and the Baudelaires looked up at the square speaker. This is Matthias, the new head of Human Resources. Inspections are over for the day, but will continue tomorrow. What nonsense, Hal muttered, putting the loop of keys down on the table. The Baudelaires looked at one another and then at the keys, as Matthias continued his announcement. Also, the speaker said, if anyone in the hospital has any valuables of any kind, please bring them to Human Resource Office for safekeeping. Thank you. My glasses are somewhat valuable, Hal said, taking them off. But I'm not going to bring them to the Human Resource Office. I might not ever see them again. That's probably true, Violet said, shaking her head at Olaf's audacity, a word which here means attempt to steal valuables from hospital employees, in addition to snatching the Baudelaire fortune. Besides, Hal said, smiling at the children and reaching for his coat, nobody's going to steal anything from me. You 3 are the only people I see at the hospital, and I trust you absolutely. Now, where did I put my keys? Here they are, Violet said, and her quiver got worse. She held up her hair ribbon, which had been tied into a circle to look like a loop of string. Hanging from the ribbon was a long row of paper clips, which Sonny had fashioned into different shapes with her teeth when Hal wasn't looking. The result looked something like Hal's loop of keys, the way a horse looks something like a cow, or a woman in a green dress looks something like a pine tree. But there was no way anyone would look at Violet's hair ribbon full of chewed-up paper clips and think it was a ring of keys. Unless, of course, their eyesight was not what it used to be. The 3 children waited as Hal squinted at what Violet was holding. Those are my keys? Hal said doubtfully. I thought I put them down on the table. Oh no, Klaus said quickly, standing in front of the table so Hal wouldn't catch a glimpse of his real keys. Violet has them. Here, Violet said, moving them back and forth so they would be even harder to squint at. Why don't I put them in your coat pocket for you? Thank you, Hal said, as Violet dropped them into his overcoat pocket. He looked at the Baudelaires, his tiny eyes shining with gratitude. That's another way you three have helped me. My eyesight's not what it used to be, you know, so I'm glad I can rely on such good volunteers. Well, good night, children. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, Hal, Klaus replied. We're just going to have one last piece of fruit here in the anteroom. Don't spoil your dinner, Hal said. It's supposed to be a very cold evening, so I bet your parents have cooked up a nice hot meal. Hal smiled and shut the door behind him, leaving the children alone with the real keys and the quivery feelings still in their stomachs. Someday, Violet said quietly, we'll apologize to Hal for playing a trick on him and explain why we had to break the rules. This wasn't a nice thing to do, even though it was necessary. And we'll return to the Last Chance General Store and explain to the shopkeeper why we had to run away. Twisp, Sunny said firmly, which meant, but not until we get a hold of the file, solve all these mysteries, and prove our innocence. You're right, Sunny, Violet said with a sigh. Let's get started. Klaus, see if you can find the right key for the library door. Klaus nodded and carried Hal's keys over to the door. Not too long ago, when the Baudelaires had been staying with Aunt Josephine by the shores of the lake, Klaus had been in a situation where he had to match up a key to a locked door very, very quickly, and since then he had been quite good at it. He looked at the lock of the door, which had a very short and narrow keyhole, and then looked at the loop of string, which had one very short and narrow key, and in no time at all the children were re-entering the library of records and looking down the aisles of file cabinets. I'm going to lock the door behind us, Klaus said, so that nobody will get suspicious if they happen to walk into the anteroom. Excuse me. Like Olaf, said Violet with a shudder. On the intercom, he said that they were stopping the inspections for the day, but I bet he's really still looking. Vapey, Sunny said, which meant then we need to hurry. Let's start with the S aisle, Violet said, for Snicket. Right, Klaus said, locking the door with a rattle. The three children found the S aisle and began walking past the file cabinets, reading the labels on them to figure out which one to open. On the sauna file, Violet said, let's move on as they reached the S's. The children moved on, their footsteps echoing off the ceilings of the room. Scarab to scavenger, Klaus said, reading one farther down the aisle. Sunny and Violet shook their heads and the Baudelaires kept moving. Secretary to sediment, Violet read. We're still not there. So they're going through the S's. So they have to look for SN. And right now they're at SE. Calm, Sunny said, which meant, I can't read very well, but I think this one says sequel to Serenity. You're right, Sunny. It's the wrong one, though, Klaus said. Shed to Sheepshank, Violet read. Shellac to Sherbert, Klaus read, walking farther down the aisle. Shipwreck to Shrimp, Sicily to Sideways, Skylight to Slob, Sludge to Smoke, Snack to Snifter, Snowball to Sober, Sonnet to Spackle. Wait, Klaus cried, back up. Snicket is between Snack and Snifter. You're right, Violet said, stepping back to find the right cabinet. I was so distracted by all the strange file names that I forgot what we were looking for. Here it is. Let's hope the file we're looking for is in this file cabinet. Klaus looked at the lock on the file cabinet and found the right key on Hal's loop on only the third try. It should be in the bottom drawer, Klaus said, close to Snifter. Look. The Baudelaires looked. A snifter is a type of glass, usually meant for holding brandy, although it is also the term for a strong wind. Plenty of words are close to that in the alphabet, and the children found many of them. There was a file on sniffing, which seemed to have many photos of noses. There was a file on Snell's Law, which states that a ray of light passing from one uniform medium to another produces an identical ratio between the sine of the angle of incidence and the sine of the angle of refraction, which Klaus already knew. Now, it's okay if you don't know that. It sounds like a lot of words. They're just saying, when you get older, you might learn about all that. There was a file on the inventor of the sneaker, whom Violet admired very much, and one on snicking, which is something Sunny had done many times with her teeth. But there was not a single scrap of paper marked Snicket. The children sighed in disappointment and shut the drawer of the file cabinet, so Klaus could lock it again. Let's try the J aisle for Jacques, Violet suggested. Shh, Sunny said. No, Sunny, Klaus said gently. I don't think H aisle is a good bet. Why would Hal have filed it under H? Shh, Sunny insisted, pointing at the door, and her siblings knew instantly they had misunderstood her. Usually when Sunny says shh, she meant something along the lines of, I think the H aisle might be a good place to look for the file. But this time she meant something more along the lines of, be quiet, I think someone's coming. Sure enough, when the Baudelaires listened closely, they could hear the clomping of some odd, teetering footsteps, as if someone were walking on very thin stilts. The footsteps grew closer and closer, and then stopped. And as the three children held their breath, the door to the library rattled as someone tried to open the door. Maybe it's Hal, Violet whispered, trying to unlock the door with a paperclip. Maybe it's Olaf, Klaus whispered, looking for us. Janitor, Sunny whispered. Whoever it is. Violet said, we'd better hurry to the J aisle. The Baudelaires tiptoed across the low-ceilinged room to the J aisle and walked down it quickly, reading the labels of the file cabinets. Jabberwocky to Jackal. Jacket to jack-o'-lanterns. Nursai. That's it, Klaus whispered. Jacques will be in Jackline to Jactinga. We hope, Violet said, as the door rattled again. Klaus hurried to find the right key, and the children opened the top drawer to look for Jacques. As Violet knew, jackline is a kind of rope used in sailing, and as Klaus knew, jacutinga is a sort of gold-bearing iron ore found in Brazil, and once again there were plenty of files between these two. But although the children found information on jack-o'-lanterns, Jack Russell Terriers, and Jacobin drama, there was no file marked Jacques. Fire! Klaus whispered, shutting and locking the file cabinet. Let's head to the F aisle. And hurry, Violet said. It sounds like the person in the anteroom is picking the lock. It was true. The Baudelaires paused for a moment and heard a muffled scratching from behind the door, as if something long and thin were being stuck in the keyhole to try to unlock the lock. Violet knew, from when she and her siblings lived with Uncle Monty, that a lockpick can often take a long time to work properly, even if it has been made by one of the world's greatest inventors. But the children nonetheless moved to the F aisle as fast as their tiptoes could carry them. Here it is, Klaus whispered. Once more, the Baudelaires hurried to find the proper key, and then the proper drawer, and then the proper file. But the papers went right from Finland to firmament, without a single word on fire in between. What will we do? Violet asked, as the door began to rattle again. Where else could the file be? Let's try to think, Klaus said. What did Hal say about the file? We know it has to do with Jacques Snicket and with fire. Prem, Sunny said, which meant, but we looked under Snicket, Jacques, and fire already. There must be something else, Violet said. We have to find this file. It has crucial information about Jacques Snicket and VFD. And about us, Klaus said. Don't forget that. The three children looked at one another. Baudelaire, Sunny whispered. Without another word, the orphans ran to the B aisle and hurried past Babbitt to Babylon, Bacteria to Ballet, and Bamboo to Baskerville, stopping at Bar Mitzvah to Bavarian Cream. As the door continued to fizzle behind them, Klaus tried 9 keys in a row before finally opening the cabinet, and there, between the Jewish coming-of-age ceremony for young women and the delicious filling of certain donuts, the children found a folder marked Baudelaire. It's here, Klaus said, taking it out of the drawer with trembling hands. What does it say? What does it say? Violet asked in excitement. Look, Klaus said. There's a note on the front. Read it, Sunny said in a frantic whisper, as the door began to shake violently on its hinges. Whoever was on the other side of the door was obviously getting frustrated with trying to pick the lock. Klaus held up the file so he could see what the note said in the dim light of the room. All 13 pages of the Snicket file, he read, have been removed from the Library of Records for the official investigation. He looked up at his sisters, and they could see that, behind his glasses, his eyes were filling with tears. That must be when Hal saw our picture, he said, when he removed the file and gave it to the official investigators. He dropped the file on the floor and then sat down beside it in despair. There's nothing here. Yes, there is, Violet said. Look. The Baudelaires looked at the file where Klaus had dropped it on the ground. There, behind the note, was a single sheet of paper. It's page 13, Violet said. The investigators must have left it behind by mistake. That's why you should keep paper clips on papers that belong together, Klaus said, even when you file them. But what does that page say? With a long crackle and a loud bang, the door to the Library of Records was knocked off its hinges and fell to the floor of the enormous room as if it had fainted. But the children paid no attention. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny all sat and looked at page 13 of the file, too amazed to even listen to the odd teetering footsteps of the intruder as the intruder entered the room and began to walk along the aisles of the file cabinets. Page 13 of the Baudelaire file was not a crowded sheet of paper. There was just one photograph stapled into place below one sentence of type, but sometimes it takes only a photo and a sentence to make an author cry himself to sleep even years after the photo was taken, or to make three siblings sit and stare at a page for a long time, as if an entire book were printed on one sheet of paper. There were 4 people in the photo, standing together outside a building as the Baudelaires recognized immediately. It was 667 Dark Avenue, where they had lived with Jerome and Esme Squalor for a brief time, until it became another place too treacherous for the children to stay. The first person in the photo was Jacques Snicket, who was looking at the photographer and smiling. Standing next to Jacques was a man who was turned away from the camera, so the children could not see his face, only one of his hands, which was holding a notebook and pen, as if the obscured man were a writer of some sort. The children had not seen Jacques Snicket since he was murdered, of course, and the writer appeared to be someone they had never seen at all. But standing next to these 2 people were another 2 people the Baudelaire children thought they would never see again. Bundled up in long coats, looking cold but happy, were the Baudelaire parents. Because of the evidence discussed on page 9, read the sentence above the photo, experts now suspect that there may be in fact one survivor of the fire, but the survivor's whereabouts are unknown. So there is a survivor of that fire, and they found a picture of their mom and dad standing with someone they couldn't see, and then, the photographer, and then Jacques Snicket. So we'll have to figure out what that all means. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.